let's talk about some matchups. My assignment from you was to pick 3 or 4, and I picked about a million.
I picked about 12, so we're good. We got it.
Some matchups. I'll start with some ACC. I think that Clemson at Louisville game is one that stands out to me. We can go back and forth on this, and then if I end up having more than you, I'll just run through the rest of mine. I'm sure we'll pick some of the same ones. Clemson at Louisville. Obviously, Louisville went into that stadium in South Carolina and won last year. Game was actually never even really close. Like Louisville kind of dominated that, and Clemson never really had a shot. I kind of like Clemson to go on the road and get some revenge, but man, if they don't and they lose to them again, I think kind of what you talked about earlier, Louisville has a really good chance to go to the ACC championship with a win in that game as long as they don't falter. That is probably the game that I'm the most interested in the ACC.
Same team, just different location. I'm going down to Atlanta, Georgia, and talking about Georgia Tech versus Clemson. I think that's a very underrated game because if we're watching Clemson hit its stride at this point, what we're going to hear from the national pundits and from people, not just you and me, is that Clemson, whether or not we want to admit that they're an ACC school, they're built to go on a run to the college football playoff. They're built to make that next step forward and progress with Cade Klubnik. But then at the same time, flip the script. Eric Rivers dominates. Dane Patterson dominates. There's a solid run game from Jamal Haynes. You get the version of Haynes King that was expected at Texas A&M. You throw in a solid defense, and you force turnovers against Cade Klubnik. And now you are walking away with a dub from Bobby Dodd Stadium. Now we have to pay attention to Georgia Tech because their schedule at that point is extremely manageable. That is one of the very few games to where it's like national level conversation. If the culture has changed, if the demeanor has changed, if we really do feel like that we're in that same realm of dark horse conversation of being a college football playoff at large bid, we got to win against Clemson and we got to show why. So I think that that's a very under the radar game. And it's going to be played in Atlanta, which again, maybe does give a little bit of favor to the Yellow Jackets.
My next one is the rematch of the ACC championship, SMU at Clemson. I don't even know that I have to explain this, but I love Rattle Ashley. I actually like Dabo a lot too, even though he's kind of a nerd on some stuff. But I think this will be a fun one. A lot of these are actually every single one except for my last one is a rematch from last year. But SMU at Clemson, I think, is going to be another fun one. Again, you rematch. I know that SMU feels like they left something on the table there. And I also think it'll be interesting to see SMU go into truly hostile territory in the ACC. They got Florida State at home last year. I know Miami's not like hostile territory, but for big games, Miami does pack it out. They didn't have to go to they're going somewhere legit this time. Let's see how they match up there.
Let's go down to November 22nd, where two of my favorite transfer portal quarterbacks are going to be going toe-to-toe against each other. And it may end up being just for that 9-win range. It's North Carolina versus Duke. I don't think enough people are paying attention to it because of Darian Mensah versus Gio Lopez. Those were two great G5 passers that are going into situations where I think they can both flourish pretty quickly. Duke, to me, still has a very challenging schedule. They play Illinois as a non-conference game early on in the year. They still have to play NC State. They have some trick-ups along the way, but they still, I think, with Manny Diaz, who got a bad rep when he was at Miami, I think can get to that 8-9 win range once again based off of defense, consistency on the ground, and maybe a little bit better quarterback play. But you already talked about this. You talked about this, TJ. That UNC schedule is Charmin soft outside of just the TCU game to begin the year. And if you get that, I mean, I don't want to say it's going to happen because it would just be it would feel like it was a college football script that was written for the NFL game because Bill Belichick, year one, about ready to go back to the NFL, taking a seat in the college football playoff. They win that game. There's a very good shot that they're at least in that undefeated conversation and going to Charlotte. Like, that is a game that is not, I think
they've got Clemson early too.
But let's say they beat TCU.
Even if they lose to Clemson, they're still.
Let's say that they lose to TCU. They beat TCU, but they lose to Clemson, and that's your only loss. I mean, they're not going to lose to any other team on that list, or they shouldn't. Simply, if you feel that good about the rest of the roster.
So I had that one on there. I had Clemson, UNC. I mean, I can't do this without talking about Florida State and Miami. Even when one team stinks, like that's always a game that gets national attention. That's, we'll see what either team is at that point. I can't guarantee that's going to be the most fun matchup ever. Florida State might get blown out again. Who knows? But that's one that I think people always want to watch. And then I had a couple of rematches. Miami at Virginia Tech, obviously the Hail Mary that didn't go Virginia Tech's way on the overturn. Fran Brown has to come down to Miami. That's kind of a fun, can he do it again? What will Syracuse look like? And then Louisville at Miami. Again, the winner of that, we both kind of talked about like who may finish 10-2, who may go 9-3. Louisville at Miami, if the Clemson-Louisville game goes the way I think it does, I think Clemson wins that game here in April. But if Louisville and Miami play later in the year, that could be for who goes to the ACC championship between those two teams.
I got Louisville. I got Virginia Tech versus Florida State as one because this could be a fireable offense game for both of these coaches. Mike Norvell, if they're trying to get to bowl eligibility and they end up losing bad in this matchup, well, he's probably going to be shown the door. Brett Pry last year, 97% returning production on that defense. On that overall roster, and they can't even get to 7-5 on the regular season. I had them going to the college football playoff, TJ. I'll be completely real. I was buying so much stock in what Virginia Tech had. And there is a pride about being in Blacksburg to where you want to kind of set the tone for yourself as an actual force in college football. If you can't deliver, then you're probably out. NC State versus Pitt is another one because I really like both these quarterbacks. Like, I think Eli Holstein is going to get only another step better with Cade Bell as his offensive coordinator. They changed up the entire offense down in Raleigh, and CJ Bailey, we've kind of talked about him. He didn't do a lot last year, but the flashes are there to believe that there can at least be something. And again, it's NC State. NC State is like one of the more safer teams that I can expect every single year to go into that 8-4, maybe even 9-3 range if they just have stable quarterback play. So I got about stock into them. And then my last one, of course, was alongside with you. It was Florida State versus Miami. It's just a matchup that everybody wants to see. And it's one that I think carries a lot of respect in this game.
Yeah. Big 12, we already mentioned it, but the Holy War is the top of my list. That the offseason drama there, I've talked about it a lot on the channel off of this show, but the offseason drama, but the Holy War truly is 365 days with accusations of tampering and everything else that goes on. I'll quickly go through a couple of these Big 12 ones and then you can roll. I won't go as detailed on some of these. The rematch of the Big 12 championship, Arizona State at Iowa State. Can Matt Campbell's team get a little bit of payback? We had both these teams you had them in your favorites, and I had Texas Tech number 4. Texas Tech at Kansas State. Like, that's a huge game. That could be a ton of points. Could be a lot of fun, but we'll see, right? Like, that's a little bit later. Those are 3 that I kind of started with.
Arizona State versus Texas Tech, to me, that could just automatically punch your ticket to the Big 12 championship. Both of them have, I think, really good quarterbacks and really good overall rosters. I think Baylor versus Kansas State's one that is not getting enough attention. Baylor could be a really big sleeper. They have one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 in Sawyer Robertson. I think that he pretty much saved the job of Dave Aranda last year, and he fits extremely well in Jake Spavital's offense. So very excited to see what he can do in this year. And then when you throw in Kansas State, they feel like a team that is trying to kind of separate itself as, hey, we didn't live up to expectations last year. Doesn't mean we can't this year. I think Utah versus West Virginia is a really interesting game. It's Rich Rod versus Kyle Whittingham, 2 completely different style of coaching mechanisms. And what we have seen the differences of is that West Virginia, who just is 2 years removed from going 9-4 with Neil Brown, has basically scrapped everything that they knew about Mountaineer football and said, this is the version that we want to have if we want to be successful. And Kyle Whittingham, who is getting closer to hitting the retirement button, said, okay, changed up my entire offense. No more Andy Ludwig. We're going to bring in the guy from New Mexico. We're going to bring in Devin Dampier, who I think could be a really good mobile player. That is going to add tremendous value to our up-tempo attack. It's going to add value on our rushing attack. That may end up leading to one of these teams setting the tone for the rest of the season. And then I don't know why, but I always love watching Kansas versus UCF. I think there's just value between what is Lance Leipold getting a win against a team that probably is going to put up a lot of points. I don't know what Scott Frost is going to be this year because of its completely different offense. Last time we saw him, they were a G5 program. But something about something about going against a Jayhawks team that maybe right now we aren't talking enough about, kind of flying under the radar a little bit going into this year. What could they be?
Yeah, I had the Dublin game, Kansas State, Iowa State, just having experienced the Dublin game. Awesome. Say what?
It's Dublin. It's awesome. Why not?
Yeah,
you drink and watch 2 Midwest programs kick ass. Why not?
Baylor versus Utah, I think, is one that's fun, and Texas Tech versus Utah, kind of for similar reasons. I think Baylor's kind of my under the radar team. We'll get to them in a minute, I think, but and then Texas Tech, their first Big 12 game, I expect them to be 3-0 there, but Utah needs to win. The expectations are still sky high. in Utah. And so I think that's an interesting early season matchup, kind of a prove it game for both teams for very different reasons. Utah, are you still relevant? Texas Tech, are you actually going to do it this year?
I think Houston's another team that you need to pay attention to. U of H versus Arizona is one that I'm kind of watching. They did a really good job of revamping their entire roster this offseason. They brought in brand new coordinators, Austin Armstrong and Slade Nagel. I think down the stretch, they're going to have some challenges, but when you look, they have a daunting schedule, but if they're able to go 6-6, again, it's a Willie Fritz mechanism. I think that one of the more winnable games is probably going to be that matchup against Arizona with the quarterback that I still have yet to give up on, and Noah Fafita.
Let's talk out of conference just a little bit, and maybe we'll go faster here. Maybe we won't. We talked about this might be a quick show, and here we go, taking all our time on the first segment.
Almost all of it.
I'll go ACC. Week one is a lot of fun with Clemson, LSU, Miami, Notre Dame, and Florida State, Alabama. Varying degrees of interest for all of those for sure, but all interesting nonetheless. What the heck is Florida State this year? Does Alabama rebound from a disappointing 9-4, right? Does Miami, can they get it going against a team that was in the national championship? And then LSU, can they finally win a week one game? I think they're 0 for their last 5. Clemson, are they for real, right? Are they going to lose to a couple of SEC teams again this year? I think the week one matchups out of conference in the ACC are a ton of fun.
I think there's 2 in the Big 12 that are also really interesting. Baylor versus Auburn in Friday night out at McLean Stadium. I mean, these are 2 teams that, again, we talk about them. Everyone's looking at what happened last season for Dave Aranda. That's kind of what you have to see this upcoming season for Hugh Freeze to fully get off of the hot seat and save his job. And I don't discredit what Auburn has done. They've spent money. They've kind of gone full in the way that Texas did in year 3, the way that Miami did last year. But you got to ask yourself, do you feel confident in the quarterback position? Because you should feel confident everywhere else. The quarterback competition for me out in Waco, Texas, it's probably as stable as it could ever be. Sawyer Robertson drastically altered the way that we view Baylor football. And I think that, again, that game being on a Friday night, does that set the tone for maybe Baylor getting into that realm of 9-10 wins is possible? Going back to Arlington is possible. It's a really fun game. I've already mentioned one team, but Colorado versus Georgia Tech. Number one, who's going to be the starting quarterback for Colorado this year? Is Juju Lewis going to beat out Caden Salter? Is Salter going to be on like a leash to where if he has too many mistakes, they go to Juju? Are we going to see Florida versus Florida last year with Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway 2.0 with Salter and Lewis? That way they both get playing time to step up with the offense. And then we've already talked about what Georgia Tech is. I'm not sleeping on them. I think they're a very balanced team. I'm excited to see what they're going to be. I think also another one, Utah versus UCLA. Nico Iamaleava's first test is going to be going up against Devin Dampier in a defense headlined by Kyle Whittingham. Witt knows defense. Witt knows how to make stops. Witt knows how to get the young coaches' minds. And I think that's going to carry a lot of weight. And if somehow Devin Dampier is able to translate what he did in New Mexico to the Power 4 level and do it efficiently, again, Utah, death taxes, sleeping on Kyle Whittingham is a bad mistake. Like, those are things that we are taught when we're children, and they probably should be embedded into our brains at this point. So I'm not going to doubt what the Utes are doing right now.
Couple ACC, SEC matchups, Miami and Florida. Obviously the bragging rights within that game. South Carolina and Clemson. Can Clemson get revenge from last year? Can South Carolina stay hot? How about South Carolina against Virginia Tech? A game they probably should win, but
you never know.
See it early in the year. And then Tennessee versus Syracuse got a lot more interesting with Nico leaving, right? Like, that's one that I probably would have penciled in and leaned Tennessee's way. But Fran Brown, certainly familiarity with Tennessee. That's one that's a lot of fun. Big 12, Kansas versus Missouri, another SEC team. That's a fun one. The backyard brawl is always fun. Obviously, now with
Rich Rod back there.
Rich Rod back into it adds another layer. TCU UNC. That's a preview of Dublin next year. And then UNC also has UCF to open up the year. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff.
You forgot a big one. And in my opinion, it's one of the most underrated rivalries in all of professional sports. It's Battle of the Iron Skillet. It's SMU versus TCU. Those two teams, the way that they play against each other, it carries so much weight. And people don't understand unless you live in the state. There's so much value on saying, hey, I represent Dallas. I represent Fort Worth. I'm telling you, when you look at what the factors that led into this match with Sonny Dykes departing, just literally to go up steam, that carries weight. And then, of course, the game is going to be at Amon G. Carter Stadium, which also just adds more fuel to the fire. One team in year one went to the college football playoff. The other one has a quarterback that was getting sought after and wanted millions of dollars to go play at Tennessee, and he nearly went there. Like, the animosity between what we know with the Horned Frogs and Mustangs, I think needs to have more value on the national stage, because the Battle of the Iron Skillet, when it was a G5 game, when it was a Power 4 game versus a G5 program, it always acted like one of the biggest and most hostile atmospheres in college football.
SMU also plays Baylor. SMU's schedule, no joke this year. Like, they kind of got lucky last year with a welcome to the ACC, Florida State being down, all these things. This year they have Baylor, TCU, Fran Brown comes to town. They've got to go to Clemson. They play Miami at home. They play Louisville at home. Got to travel to Boston College in November. That'll probably be the red bandana game just because that's how that works out. Yeah. And so, yeah, not an easy road for SMU, but that SMU Baylor one is the last one that I had written down as well.